Hi, everyone. Welcome to another class. Today we're going to review a little bit the assignment about curves that you guys did last class. Okay, so let me share my screen and we'll just get started with that. Hold on a second. Okay, so what we were supposed to do last time is to read that document from Adobe where, it describes how curves work. So I just want to go over in a little bit more of a real time sort of time frame in terms of what we're doing right now. And if you have any questions, please email me as soon as you can so that I can answer them. I think that, all the assignments that I got from everybody were right on target. So, I think we're doing good with that, but just in case, let me know if you do have an issue. All right, so as you know by now, all the shortcuts that we have up here create an adjustment layer, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Remember that adjustment layers are very, very effective in terms of editing an image because you can change them at any point after you finish with the image. So if you save an image and you come back, 2 years from now and you decide you want to change that, you can do it without sacrificing more data, okay? But I also want to remind everybody that as soon as you flatten the image, either to upload it to a website or anything like that, or if you need to print that image, you are going to apply all those changes and those adjustment layers that were virtual before become real adjustments to the image. So they do become destructive when you flatten the image. Okay, so let's go ahead and open a curves adjustment layer. And here you go. This is the curve, the way that you guys read about it in Adobe. And basically what I want to remind everybody is, the easiest approach to curve is to look at the gradients that you have both on the left right here and at the bottom right here. You see where both black gradients meet, it's your black point. That is the darkest point of your image, okay? And if you map out where both gradients, when they go all the way to white, where they meet, this up here is going to be your white point, the brightest part of your image. We also have a histogram in the background telling us where the data is, okay? In terms of ease of use, curves is a very powerful adjustment because it is probably the only one in Photoshop that is absolutely non-linear. In other words, you're not just using a slider to create an adjustment. In this case, you are creating a curve that matches the image. Okay, so you don't just go ahead and start moving points around. You need to know exactly what those points are doing. And to facilitate that, what I usually recommend you do is to use the bottom of, this bottom gradient right here for location in terms of where that adjustment and where that point is going to be located. So if you need something like in the dark areas, in the shadows, it's going to be to the left around here. If you need adjustments in the highlights or the higher portion of the dynamic range, is going to be to the right. So that's the place where we are going to decide first. So for example, if I want to make an adjustment to the mid-tone of this image, in other words, just change the whole image and make it lighter, I'm going to go to the middle of my histogram right here, and I am going to click and put a point right there. So that is the location of my point. And now the gradient on the left is going to tell me what the results that I am looking for and how I go about getting them. So if I move that upwards, as you can see, the gradient is telling me that the image is going to get lighter. And you guys see that that is true. The higher I move that point, the lighter the image gets. The lower I move that point, the darker my image gets. Okay? So that is the easiest way to approach curves. Now, one of the questions that I had in the messages that I received from you guys is how to remove a point from a curve. And the easiest way to do it is just to drag it off. Once you create a point by clicking, you can drag it off and it disappears from the curve that you were trying to create. Okay, so again, the most basic function of curves is to make something either lighter or darker. And you can use that adjustment anytime you want to make a global adjustment. You just go either higher or lower, okay? Making sure that you use the bottom one for location as to where that adjustment is going to happen, and then the left-hand side to make sure of what the adjustment is going to do to your image, okay? Now, but that is just the basic principle of curves. The more advanced functions of curves have to do with selecting a portion of the dynamic range that you want to control and controlling only that area. So for example, if I put a point in the midtones, okay, and I put a point in my shadow areas, and by the way, this squares right here, these quadrants are very useful, because if I put a point right here in this quadrant and I make it lower, look what happens to my contrast. By making the shadow value lower than my midtone, and you see how the curve slightly curves upward when I move that. You guys can see over here, yes, how it curves slightly when I move this. What I am doing is increasing the contrast of the image. The opposite is true. If I make my shadows lighter, and again, there's a little bit of a dip in the highlights, I am reducing the contrast of this image, okay? But there is an even more interesting thing that you can do with curves. And so far we've covered two things, and that is, the brightness and the contrast, but the brightness and the contrast in a very specific way, where you decide where the shadows start and where the highlights start, and where you want to create the point where they are separated. So the midpoint that I have here is separating the shadows from the highlights. So if I want to increase the highlights without reducing more shadows, I can bring the shadows up a little bit, and I can only increase the highlights. And look at the difference between that and this. You see how much brighter the highlights are. But if you notice, the bottom portion has not changed. And that is because what I did with the shadow portion is I anchored it so that it stays the same. So the shadows and my midtones are staying the same. The only thing that I am changing is the highlights, okay? So that is what anchoring a point on a curve does. All right, so please remember that when you are exploring curves, and I highly, highly encourage you to keep exploring and to let me know if you have any other questions about what I've just shown you right now. We will have an advanced tutorial on curves a little bit later in the semester once we know some of the other adjustments. But for the time being, this is all I'm asking you to do, is to understand the brightness and the contrast. And we are also going to visit the other section of the curve, because if you have, what we have here is an RGB curve. In other words, when I change this curve right here under RGB, the three channels that I have here, red, green, and blue, are changing at the same time. But what I can do is I can select a specific curve. So for example, if my image was still a little bit too yellow, I can come in here and say, well, the complementary color of blue is yellow. So if I reduce blue on this image, is going to make it yellower. And let's see if that is true. You see how yellow that is? Now, if I add more blue, the image is less yellow. So that little yellow cast that I had before, look at the difference between that and this. So I've controlled my color with curves also, right? I can make color corrections using curves to make the image represent better the color that I want the dog to be. Remember that we are talking, when we are evaluating color, we are talking about colors that are sort of irrelevant to the image because we really don't know what that color is. And then we have colors that are absolutely essential. The room in which the dog is an uncertainty. Unless you've been in that room, we don't know the specific color of the walls or the bedspread or anything like that. But we've all seen a dog and what a dog should look like. And usually a white fur in a dog is off-white. That is a little bit too much off-white. It's got a lot of yellow still in that image. If I correct that by adding a curve, I can make that color more realistic. Now, another thing that you can do with curves, which is the nonlinear aspect of this, is, for example, if I want to correct the lower portion and make it yellower for whatever reason, and I want to select the upper portion of my dynamic range, and I want to make it more neutral, look what happened to the walls. The walls stay yellow, but the dog becomes whiter. The highlights are whiter because I've added some blue to it. So it's not only about making a linear adjustment. In this case, a linear adjustment would be just making sure that there is less yellow in an image. I can see if I wanted the walls to be a little bit warmer, I can reduce the amount of blue. So look what happens to the wall in the back, right? I am making that adjustment here in the lower portion of this dynamic range to make sure that the dog stays without the yellow, but the walls keep the yellow. And that is what a non-linear adjustment is. And look at this. This is non-linear. I mean, it is a curve. That's why it's called a curve, because it's non-linear. Okay, so very, very powerful adjustment. One of the great things about curves is that when you understand curves and when you get good at using curves in your images, it can do like maybe 60 or 70% of the work that you need to do in an image with one adjustment. So if you get really good at one adjustment, you can do 60 or 70% of the adjustments that you need on your image just by using curves. Okay. I am going to send you guys another tutorial that it comes straight from Adobe, and we are going to talk a little bit more about advanced color management in our next session. But what I really wanted is for you to play with curves a little bit more and send me questions if you feel that there is something that you don't understand about curves. I mean, this is a very, very, very important adjustment. So take a little time. This week, the assignment is to read the link that I am going to send you. I am not going to ask you to do anything to an image, because what I want you to do is to play with curves with the images that you have been submitting as a homework, or with the image that I've uploaded so that you can use. Play more with curves and send me at least one question. That is all I want from everybody, is for you to send me one question. Okay, one question about curves. That's all I am asking in terms of this quote unquote assignment. It's not going to be graded. There's going to be a check mark next to the people that submit the question. And if you don't submit the question, please make an effort and go over curves again and make sure that you do submit at least one question. Okay. Thank you very much. Please check the file section. There's going to be a link to YouTube. Unfortunately, the videos that I've been uploading to Canvas have been a little bit blurry, and I apologize for that. So I think that uploading them to YouTube is going to be a better choice. And I will also upload the link that I want you guys to do a little research on. I need you guys to read this link that I'm going to send you in the Adobe website. And if you have questions about that, please send them to me too. And again, I hope everybody is doing great, and I will see you next week.